Hello and welcome to Focus IR and this investor presentation from GreenRoc Strategic Materials, which is developing critical mineral projects in Greenland. The format today is that the Chief Executive, Stefan Bernstein, will go through a presentation and then I will be posing the questions that you've sent to me for me to ask him. There you go. That sounds complicated, but it's not. Stefan, with that, I will hand over to you. A very warm welcome to you.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm very happy to present to you today the recent development on our project, which is about providing graphite anode material for the European battery industries and also car manufacturers, of course, based on our supply of graphite in Greenland. So I have structured my presentation so that it is a little less on the project, because you can read about that in the recent RNSs, and a bit more about the market status, where we are in the graphite market, how that is developing over the coming years, and then also some of the recent development on the political scene with regard to how the policymakers regard the supply of critical raw materials, and also what initiatives that are being put in place now to support the production of critical raw materials in our part of the world. Let me just recap, so to speak, on the Amitsoq graphite project. It consists really of two important parts. One is the upstream extraction, which we have a planned production of 80,000 tons of graphite concentrate from the mine in Southern Greenland. That is then taken on to export it as graphite concentrate to a plant which will be locating in Norway. There's also an option to locate such a plant in North America to produce the active anode material through some technical processing and purification that I'll go through in a minute. So first of all, a little bit about the mine itself. We have a very significant resource at the mine, about 23 million tons with more than 20% graphite, which I like to highlight is more than 3 times the average grade that is for producing mines, graphite mines today. So a very, very rich deposit. In fact, the richest graphite deposit under development worldwide today of natural flake graphite. So that is ample resource for mining. The mine model we presently have in place, have mining for 22 years, is actually only addressing a third of the resource we have defined. So there's either, you could say, we have a potential for extension of the mine life, or we can ramp up mining rate, or even both. So also like to stress Greenland is a very pro-mining country. Of course, they have strict environmental regulations, but the government is very much in favor of mining, want to establish a mineral industry, and to that end, they have actually streamlined the processing, the permitting processing, so that we have now been in a position where we can submit our application for an exploitation license, which we did in September this year. It's going to be processed over this fall here, and we expect to, we are expecting the exploitation license to be granted sometimes in early 2025. But of course, depending on the government's decisions and processing. I would also like to stress that we see a lot of local support for the project from the people in South Greenland commune, and also from the local population in Nordalig, which is the southernmost town in Greenland, located only about 20 kilometers south of Amitsoq. A few details on the economics about this mining operation. We released a preliminary economic assessment last fall. It shows that a relatively modest capital investment, about 130 million US, and it has a positive net present value after tax at 8% discount rate of 179 million US. On to the production of graphite active anode material. This is a process that takes the graphite concentrate, reshape the individual grains, make them a uniform particle size distribution, then purify and coat them to produce what's called coated spherical purified graphite, CSPG, which is also synonymous for active anode material, or AAM. So you have to get used to these acronyms. But CSPG or AAM, which is a key ingredient in making graphite. It's a key ingredient in making lithium batteries. In fact, it makes up nearly 50% of the volume of the battery. It is a core component because it's a material that receives the lithium ions during the charging and release them again during discharging. The plant we're setting up here will be able to produce about 40,000 tons of CSPG or active anode material, which is sufficient to supply the production of about 1 million electric vehicles per year. We conducted a pre-feasibility study, which we concluded this summer with support from the UK's Advanced Propulsion Centre, a grant from there of about £250,000. The numbers in the economic model that came out of this technical and economic assessment of such an active anode materials production plant shows that it has a higher capital expense here of about 340 million US. But then, on the other hand, it also has a significantly higher net present value after tax again here, calculated at 8% discount of more than 620 million US dollars. So a very profitable undertaking. Now that plant, the first plant we will be setting up will be located in southern Norway. We have found a site for it. We have reserved a place in what's called the Longum Nord, which is part of the Eide Materials Park, located very close to the Arendal Harbor. There are several reasons why we decided to locate ourselves in Norway for the first active anode materials production plant. That is because first of all, it has access to low CO2 emission energy from hydropower. And what is equally important is that it's very inexpensive energy, amongst the lowest in Europe. And then also Norway has a national battery strategy in place, which means that, for instance, this place we're locating ourselves now has been set out for battery-related industries and has all the regulations in place. And then also there's several support measures in place in Norway to help establishing battery industries and battery-related industries, including production of some of the raw materials. And we have seen that through various supportive initiatives towards, for instance, Morrow's Gigafactory, but also Freyr's Gigafactory and several other producers of battery components. Now, the time frame for us is such that we've completed a lot of work here in 2023 and 24. In front of us now, the top line you can see here is the development of the mining in Greenland. After we hopefully receive our exploitation license early 2025, we still need to complete the environmental and social impact assessment and then prepare for the pre-feasibility study. And then that in turn will allow us to go on to receive a mining permit in 2026, conducting the definitive feasibility studies and then start construction in 26. With 2 years of construction, we expect to be able to open in 2028. A similar parallel plan is for the active anode materials plant. We will be setting up a pilot plant to process graphite concentrate for the Amitsoq to produce and learn about the production of this material, go through the qualification test, arrive at the definitive feasibility study, and then also final investment decision in 26, so we can start construction through 26, 27 with opening production in 28. And to that end, I think it's also very important to stress that we are currently in discussions with various offtakers, both battery producers and car manufacturers. And we receive a lot of important and useful information with regard to the specifications of this material. And we're also discussing the potential for signing future offtake agreements with these various players. Now, graphite, very important in the energy transition, as I mentioned, because of its prominent role in the manufacturing of lithium-based batteries and also fuel cells, for that matter. Therefore, it's seen to be, the demand is seen to increase by 4 times, 400% over the coming decade. Important is also that China has a dominance on the production of graphite and also the manufacturing of active anode material, to a degree that today we are seeing a 80% share. China has an 80% share of the production of natural flake graphite. It has a 97% share of the world market for natural graphite active anode material, which is our end product. And then across natural flake graphite, active anode material, and synthetic graphite material, they are sitting on nearly 100%, 98% of the global production. Now, we've been aware of this dominance for quite a while, which is one of the reasons why we have various political initiatives to change that recently put in place. But actually, what we can see is that China's market share has gone up over the past year. In parentheses, you can see the numbers that were ruling in 2023, that is a year ago. So, for instance, China's share of worldwide production of natural flake graphite has gone up from 60% to now 80%. And similarly, the global share of active anode materials production has gone up from 93% to now 98%. Of course, stressing the how exposed the supply chains is for this critical raw material. In fact, it is the most exposed of all of the critical raw materials for the energy transition. So there's a huge demand. We just saw there's a 4 times increase in demand over the coming decade. There's that demand is coming not only from the electric vehicle battery industry, but also important is the growth that we are seeing from electric storage systems that are the batteries that are driving is the kind of the heart of solar panel energy plants. And also there's several like domestic household ESS batteries in production now. They're being established at a very high rate now in not only in Europe but also particularly in the United States. And we also see quite a rapid growth in India. So that means that not only is there a big need for the transition from combustion engine cars to electric vehicles, but also in other sectors such as these. To illustrate the importance of China's stronghold here on graphite, we can look at the graphite prices over the past couple of years, 2 or 3 years, which is illustrated here by 2 graphs. We can see a price development that peaked. This is for natural flake graphite, the raw material that you produce active anode material from. It peaked in the spring of 2022, and since that, there's been a steady decline in prices, particularly for the product priced in China. We've seen nearly a 50% reduction in prices over the past year or year and a half. to me, there's no doubt that this fall in price has been set in place to maintain China's dominance on this market. The effect is that a lot of graphite projects worldwide are now in care maintenance or has halted development further. We can also see that there's an effect of the decision from China in the fall of 2023 to set in place export regulations with the effect of December 1st, 2023, that all exports of any kind of graphite has to pass Beijing for approval. And as an effect of that, we see that in December 23, there's a return in market price for graphite concentrate on the European market. Now, these are not really for active anode material because there are no production of active anode material in Europe, nor is there in the United States, apart from one single one that is just being built today. But it just illustrates the consequences of China's control on the graphite prices. So what we see in Europe today is that some of the prices have recovered recently because of this political move from China, but that's for more traditional users of graphite. Very importantly, China has maintained, because they are basically the only producer of graphite active anode material, even though these price slumps here that we're seeing for the raw material, they have managed to keep the high prices of the active anode material being traded between $5.5 per kilogram to $7.5 dollars per kilogram, depending on quality. Right, so there are several political initiatives now in place to help relieve this how the supply chains for Europe's industries are exposed. The first of them I'm going to mention is the European Union's Critical Raw Materials Act that was passed with record speed here in the spring. It stipulates that there are 17 strategic raw materials, of which graphite has a prominent position. By 2030, that is in only 5 years' time, 10% of the needs in European Union has to be covered by domestic production. 40% of the processing needs to be covered by in Europe or neighbor countries or associated countries. That is the kind of the background for a decision to help bring about new production of these very critical and strategic raw materials. So to that end, there has been decided to announce strategic projects under the Critical Raw Materials Act. And there's been a call for these that closed, the first call closed on August 22 this year. And announcements of which projects will become strategic projects will be made in March 2025. Now, we submitted 2 applications, one for the extraction and one for the processing. And I'm happy to announce that both projects have now passed the completion review. These are fairly comprehensive applications. And it is still slightly unclear exactly what such strategic projects will receive, but certainly they will be speeding up the national permitting processes, and they will also work. The European Commission will work with their various governmental bodies to support access to finance for these projects. There's another initiative, the EU Battery Passport, which is put in place to help making the sourcing of raw materials more transparent. And it also provides a tool to regulate raw material sourcing and in turn also prioritize domestic supply. That is put in place by 2027 in only a couple of years' time. Now turning our eyes across the Atlantic to the US, there is the Inflation Reduction Act that has put in place tax credits to electric vehicles. But there's an exception to these tax credits, namely that if the raw materials or components are coming from so-called foreign entity of concerns, which includes China, then they do not qualify for these tax credits, which amounts to up to $7,500 per vehicle. So there's a very strong incentive for both Europeans and the American OEMs to source raw materials in places outside of the foreign entities of concern. And it's very important part of the European industry. We see across the European Union and the UK, the value of export of cars to the United States is nearly 50 billion euros per year. Now, of course, today not all of them are electric vehicles, but only just last year, 14.6% of all cars produced in Europe were electric vehicles. That's only going to go up in the future. So it's a very, very high value part of European export, which is depending suddenly on whether you can source your raw material in our part of the world, for instance, Greenland. There's another initiative also led by the US. This is a Mineral Security Partnership. It is the US, the European Union, and 13 other countries, including Canada, Australia, Japan, the UK, Norway, and so forth. They're concerning the sourcing of strategic raw materials or critical raw materials for the energy transition. And again, graphite has a prominent place there. There's been held several meetings over the past year. We've been invited to the first meeting of the Mineral Security Partnership in January last year, where we were presenting our project. And since then, we have been invited to speak at a conference held in Toronto in March 2023, arranged by the South Korean government, only about graphite supply, where we were invited to speak as one of only 3 companies. There's another meeting to be held in the Raw Materials Week in Brussels in December, where we are also invited to speak and present our project. And we're now an official project under the Mineral Security Partnership. An initiative under the MSP is the establishment of the MINVEST, which stands for Mineral Investment Network for Vital Energy Security and Transition. It was set up just as of last month. And it is set up to accelerate investments and coordinate investments between public and private sources. So my last slide here just illustrates where we are sitting in the global landscape for graphite production. In 2023, world production of graphite amount to about 1.5 million tons of graphite concentrate. Large majority of that production took place in China. More than 1 million tons, more precisely 1.25 million tons of graphite was produced in China in 2023. The next countries with a significant production are Brazil and countries in southeastern Africa, which collectively only produced about 15% of the world's supply of graphite. And then there's minuscule production in Russia, India, and a few European countries, and then Canada and Mexico. These are the raw materials for active anode materials production. Now, when you look at the demand, in 2023, last year, Europe, United States, and Japan's collective share of the global production of, not of the production, but the demand for this material was about 30%. So 30% of all graphite produced in the world went to the industries in these countries. That's going to grow. It's going to double over the coming decade to 60%, covering, of course, the rolling out of electric vehicles, but then also, as I mentioned, the electric storage systems and so forth. And I think I'd like to mention also a very important development in the defense industry that is also reliant on graphite for production of certain systems. Now, when you look at these countries, huge demand, 60%, then on this map, they are all gray, more or less. So Amitsoq here could come in very handy. It's actually very centrally placed in the North Atlantic to supply both the European Union, European countries, and North American countries with this very important component of the energy transition. Thank you.
Many thanks, Stefan. Very insightful, and you've already pre-covered a lot of the investor questions that were sent ahead of the presentation. However, there are some that I would perhaps just like to delve into a little bit more. So we'll start off with, you've mentioned the EU, but what is the status of the EU funding?
Right. So there are several instruments that are being put in place. Some of them we don't know of yet. It's still being developed with the European Commission, how to put in place support measures to make all these strategic projects come live, or those that will become strategic projects. So that's something that will be developed over the coming, say, half year or so. But there are already now different instruments that are being announced. For instance, Germany has its raw materials fund that was set up earlier this month, which has 1 billion euros for raw materials projects that support or delivers to German industries. And as you know, there are very important German car manufacturers, for instance, that could potentially offtakers for us. So that's one thing that could be accessed from our side. And then the European Battery Alliance are also working on setting up a €500 million fund to support raw materials that are going directly to the battery industry. So these are some of the initiatives that are being taken.
So you mentioned Germany there. One investor asks, any shareholder events in Germany planned?
I've been looking for that for a while because there's, of course, a very significant understanding also of the importance of these critical raw materials being so vital for the German car manufacturing. And also, we actually have a kind of a mirror listing in Frankfurt. So I've been looking for a while to see if there are investors events where I can present and I can speak to potential investors. So I'll keep looking and hopefully I'll find something.
Okay, let's go to the asset. Someone asks, is more drilling or resource expansion planned?
So, as I mentioned in the presentation, we don't really need any more resource to make a viable mine that can run for decades, and even with a higher mining rate than we have planned for the moment. However, of course, given the demand that we are seeing in the coming years, I think it makes sense to think about how such production could be amplified also over time, not only from the Amitsoq mine, but perhaps from some of the satellite occurrences of graphite, where we know that we have graphite that runs typically grades around 20%, 25%, even up to about 30%. So I would certainly love to drill some of those. However, I'm also, of course, I understand that this is something that is, of course, costs money. So I think that's something that will wait until we, for instance, have a joint venture partner. We have a bit of geotechnical information to gather at the Amitsoq project to complete the definitive and certainly also the pre-feasibility studies.
Okay. Can Stefan provide an update on the phase 3 drilling at Amitsoq?
Yes, so which is more or less what I just referred to. There will be a small amount of drilling required to conduct the pre-feasibility study and the definitive feasibility studies. Not so much in terms of resource drilling. There will be a need for a bit of drilling to tighten up some of the resource categories, but that's mainly to lift some from the inferred to the indicated and indicated to measured. Most of the resource that has been planned in the PEA are actually in the indicated and measured categories. So, but some geotechnical drilling will be needed, a relatively small amount of drilling.
Okay, forgive me for making you to repeat your answers, but it's good for reinforcement. Well, it is for me at least. Another question: what exploration is planned for the additional land covered by the license extension granted in April 2024?
Yes, so I think it is important for us to show that that we're not just having Amitsoq on our licenses. We have a range of other indications of and mineralizations that suggest that we have several other deposits. They could easily be of the size or even larger than Amitsoq. As mentioned, there are indications also that they run grades that are also similar. So the plans are to work on those. The initial work doesn't need to be particularly expensive. Sampling, mapping, understanding more about these deposits and get an indication of the potential size prior to any drilling that could take place in the coming time.
Okay, next steps after GreenRoc receives its exploitation permit.
So with regard to Amitsoq, once we have that in place, we will be conducting in terms of like the permitting, we'll be completing the environmental and social impact assessments. We'll go on to negotiate the impact benefit agreement, and then write up a mining plan and a closure plan, and then there will be we will submit the application for a mining permit, which is like a technical approval of our project, which is important before we can start construction. So those are like the permitting things in front of us. But with the exploitation license that we expect to receive, hopeful to receive, maybe I should say, but in early 2025, the political approval is in place.
How will the exploitation site receive power, asks another.
We will strive to produce our graphite concentrate in Greenland with the lowest emission of CO2 possible. But we also conscious that CO2 neutral energy sources are not really available yet for such relatively remote locations. The best source of energy presently is still diesel. However, there's a very fast development on that front also. For instance, there's a lot of development in replacing diesel with ammonia. Ammonia is used in engines that are basically same as diesel engines. So what we will do probably is starting out with a design using a diesel power plant, but then replace the diesel engines with ammonia-driven engines within a few years after start, if not already at construction, because we are still 4 years from opening the mine.
Okay, so therefore, what is the timing for mine construction, the start of the mine construction?
we're hopeful if everything goes according to plan, and of course there's the access to capital granted, then we can start construction in late 26.
So obviously there's an awful lot going on. So I think this is a very pertinent question. Are you planning to expand the team? So how many do you have working at the moment? Because to me, it's just you. But are you planning on expanding?
Yes, of course we are. But again, that's something that needs to be done like organically, as we have the capital to support that expansion. I've had a very good person working with me here on developing the active anode materials plant and the pre-feasibility study we conducted on that. And as we grow, of course, as we progress, there will be a need to employ mining engineers, project managers, and process engineers, obviously.
This is a great question about the airport. With the extension of the runway at Nuuk Airport, meaning that it will be able to serve more international destinations, do you think this signals growing interest in Greenland as a strategic minerals player?
Well, indirectly, perhaps. I see now that there's a new connection opening between New York and Nuuk, direct flight. And also next year, Denmark is opening, SAS is opening a new connection, Copenhagen-Nuuk, in addition to the one that's already there. So I think it will add to put Greenland back in the, well, maybe not back, but establish Greenland as a place that people have some knowledge of, and be a bit more acquainted with Greenland, both in terms of its culture and its beautiful nature and the people that live there, and also as a potential supplier of critical raw materials.
Often the conversations that you and I have are very sort of Europe-focused, but increasingly the US is being brought into conversations where your company is concerned, and someone's asking, will the offtake be taken by the US as well as Europe?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I think having established active anode material plant, once that's up and running in Norway, there's no hindrance because it's so highly valuable product to ship that. I mean, shipping rates are not that big, so we could definitely export some of that to the United States. But then I can certainly also see, as I touched on in the presentation, that there are certain advantages being placed in the US with an active anode materials plant there to supply the US market. So I think that's something that we'll be looking into further in the coming time.
Will the graphite suitability testing by offtake partners be done in parallel to development?
Yes, it will be. So as soon as, actually before we start construction at the mine in Greenland, we'll be able to, because we have the underground workings from the old mine already in place. As you may know, it was an operating mine 100 years ago. So we have the luxury of being able to extract high quality ore from the heart of the ore deposit already now. So we'll make that available to the pilot processing plant we'll be setting up, so we can start the qualification process a long time before the construction starts at the mine.
Will our product, your product, be benefiting from guaranteed downside pricing, or will it limit the upside?
Yeah, and again, this is a really interesting question, and it's something that is being discussed now, particularly in EU circles. They are aware of China's ability to dump prices at any time, really. And when you consider that has been done now for graphite to some extent, but has been done historically for rare earth element, for instance, which has hold back Western companies from developing graphite and also rare earth element deposits to production. So being aware of that, there's some discussions whether they can establish some kind of floor pricing to make sure these projects always will be able to produce with a profit and not with a loss. But of course,
that's always ideal.
Yeah, it's always ideal, which is not the case at the moment, unfortunately. But it comes, of course, with because you may take away the downside for these mines, but maybe it's fair also to consider then what if the prices take off, because that, on the other hand, is also kind of a limiting factor. So maybe there will then be a what do you call it, the ceiling pricing also. So it's all being discussed at the moment. One point I'd like to make is that if we were in production today, of course, the very low graphite raw materials prices is something that will be worrying about. But actually, the active anode material pricing that we see in the world today will be able to meet those prices with a profit. So actually the NPV of $620 million US is based on the current prices of active anode material.
Understood. So the original equipment maker, the OEM, will an OEM be investing equity in the project in exchange for the offtake?
I sure hope so. And it's something that it's really interesting. It's something that we see now more, I wouldn't say often, but we've seen a development towards that. As the car manufacturers become aware of these bottlenecks and how access to the key raw materials may potentially hamper their production of, what they produce. Then there are initiatives to secure those supply lines by, for instance, investing directly in the extraction industries. And what we've seen recently is, for instance, Stellantis investing in potential supply of cobalt in Norway. And we have also seen General Motors putting in quite a large investment in lithium production. And I wouldn't be surprised if we at some point see a similar initiative in the graphite space.
Okay, let's be crude and talk about money. Does the company qualify for government grants or similar corporate non-dilutive finance? What is happening concerning the US bank letter of intent?
Yeah, so first of all, do we qualify? We're working very hard to be in a position where we do qualify for such grants or loans, because that's an obvious road to finance our projects going forward. So some of them, I would say that we potentially already qualify for. For instance, there are some of the supply schemes in Norway that we will be addressing in the coming time. There are some in Europe where we'll be working on putting us again in a position where we do qualify, then similarly in the US. With respect to the US Exim letter of interest that we received earlier this year, which was an invite to apply for up to $3 million US to support parts of the work program, then I can say that we've been working with the US Exim Bank. There's some, you could say, complications because normally they provide these loans for projects that are either close to production or already in production, where they can take security in like forward production or something. Now that's a little bit more tricky for the mineral industry. They hadn't done that before for the mineral industry, so they still need to do some development there and understand better how they can make these apply to projects such as ours. But we're not the only project in the mining space that have received these letter of interest. So And also they issue these because they can see it's in the interest of the United States. So they are working with us now to see how that can be made into reality.
So you mentioned other mining companies there. One question is, the current market value of the company is significantly below that of peer groups. Why is this, and what does management intend to do about it?
Well, some of the things we can't really do much about, but of course the main thing is that we can put ourselves on the top list of projects worldwide in terms of quality, in terms of how we're doing things. So, and I think that will eventually pay off. I think one of the reasons, several reasons why some of them are doing slightly better, not that they. In general, I think we are more or less on par with the graphite industry peers. Some of them, though, have been on the market for a longer time, up to 10, 15 years. Some others are located places where they have been able to receive very substantial funding. For instance, a couple of projects in Australia, where they have they understand the business of mining, they understand the challenges that these companies are facing. So there are quite important measures put in place there to support the industries. And of course, a similar thing, if that were to happen here in our part of the world, we'll definitely see a strong effect of that.
Stefan, I can tell you that I'm still getting questions coming through on my mobile phone, and we've only got a finite amount of time. So just a couple more questions, and then I think what we'll do is we'll do some written answers to the questions that we're not able to acknowledge in this session. Another tough question: how do you plan to avoid the destruction of shareholder value by frequent capital raises which destroy the share price?
Yeah, so of course that's something that we are very aware of, and which I also, as a shareholder, suffer from watching. So, and I'm conscious, of course, also that in the coming time there will be parts of the work program that requires larger investments that we can possibly raise, given our current market cap. Now, I think that one of the reasons why we see these declines is a concern amongst the shareholders or investors, how we will be able to finance the path going forward. Obviously, it's a kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy that as the share price goes down, the harder it gets to raise the capital. However, I think I strongly believe that we have made some very important moves towards bringing in financials that are outside of the traditional, like just raising funds on the market. For instance, through receiving some of these grants, either in form of undilutive direct grants, which are usually in the smaller range, or larger loans, also from public sources. And we are also presently exploring the possibility and talking to potential joint venture partners to come in at asset level.
That was going to be my final question, Stefan. I was going to say, let's end on a bit of excitement. How soon before a joint venture is announced?
Yeah. Well, so that's I can't reveal anything about that, of course. But what I can say is that we are speaking to a handful of different car manufacturers. We're also speaking to battery producers regarding potential agreements. We're speaking to potential financial partners and also technical partners that could provide some of the funding we need to develop our work program. So that's very, very high on our agenda. That's something we work very deliberate on now, and I think we're going to see that that's going to bear fruit sometime. I can't say when. It can be some months away. It can be several months away. But it will. I'm firmly believing that will happen. I'll just say one last thing. I think you can say that with the relatively modest raises we have been able to make over the past couple of years, we have made a lot of progress. If you look back on our RNSs over the past, say, couple of years, I think that we have been able to accomplish a very comprehensive work program that puts us in a completely different place than where we were just a couple of years ago, and also now put us in amongst the top ranks of projects under development today of graphite.
What a lovely way to end this session. Thank you very much indeed, Stefan. That was a very wholesome presentation. And as I said, so many questions have come in, which is good. It's when you're not asked any questions, which is bad. But yes, plenty coming through. Stefan Bernstein, the Chief Executive of GreenRoc Strategic Materials. Thank you very much indeed. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.